A solid year for Georgia Tech in 2024. What will 2025 look like? We're going to break down the schedule and give you a very early projected record for the Yellow Jackets here in this video, and we'll start with that schedule. Here it is. So they will open up. This is actually going to be a Friday night game on the road at Colorado. That's actually going to be a big game. That's going to be one of the biggest games of week one. Really looking forward to that one. You've got two teams that should be pretty good this year. Georgia Tech does return a lot. Colorado maybe some question marks there in terms of some star power gone, but I feel like that's going to be a pretty good team. So that's a big game to kick off the season. After that, they'll play Gardner-Webb on September 6th, and then it's home for Clemson September 13th. That's where they will open up ACC conference play. They play Temple after that, September 20th at home, so you got 3 home games in a row. And then their first road game in the ACC, it's on the road at Wake Forest, September 27th. So they'll play 5 games, and then they'll get their first bye week on October 4th. They will be home for Virginia Tech on October 11th, then on the road at Duke October 18th, back home for Syracuse October 25th, and on the road against NC State on November 1st. So kind of back and forth, home and away here in the ACC. But then they get their second bye week, and they'll have another road game, this time at Boston College, November 15th. They get Pittsburgh at home November 22nd, and they will close things out with Georgia in the non-conference. That's going to be on the Friday after Thanksgiving, November 28th, and that game will be at home for Georgia Tech. Should be a pretty good game. I mean, last year was good. Georgia Tech, again, should be good this year. I would say at least as good as they were last year. So that'll be a big game to close out the year in that rivalry. So you look at the schedule. Yeah, Colorado and Georgia in the non-conference, obviously a very respectable non-conference schedule. But even in the ACC, you look at their schedule, they play, a decent schedule. They do have to play Clemson. Good news is you don't have Miami, you don't have SMU. You look at the road games, Wake Forest, Duke, NC State, Boston College. Not a bad road schedule at all. You get some of the tougher games potentially at home with Clemson, Virginia Tech, maybe Syracuse, and then Pittsburgh. So let's see how it stacks up with the other teams in the ACC. And you can see their opponents last season. Their opponents for this year went last season 33-31, so a 52% win percentage. But I think some of those teams might actually have a little bit of a drop off this year potentially, and so I actually think that it's not maybe going to be that tough this year. I think that win percentage might be under 50%. We'll see. Probably right there around that mark though, middle of the pack in the ACC. Again, this does show you that it's one of the tougher schedules, but I think it's at least kind of middle of the pack there. And again, we had several teams. So SMU, NC State, Wake Forest, all of these teams have opponents that had a 52% win percentage last year. So let's go to the projections now. And this is where we've been the last 4 years. Our projection and the actual record for Georgia Tech in 2021 projected to go 4-8. Their record was 3-9. In 2022, projected to go 4-8. They went 5-7. In 23, projected to go 5-7, they went 6-6, and then last year projected to go 6-6, they went 7-5. So you go to 21 under the projection, but then the last 3 years they have beaten the projection by 1 every single year, and they've gotten a little bit better each and every year. So they've come from 3 to 5 to 6 to 7 wins. So this year, if you continue that trend, this team could possibly get to 8 wins. And I actually think the potential's there for Georgia Tech to do even better than that. I think this does have the chance to be a pretty good team in the ACC this year. So we'll go to the projection now, and so this is all based off of our tier rankings. Georgia Tech is a tier 3 team in our tier rankings. That's going to be the same tier as I don't know if they really have anyone on this schedule it's Colorado. Colorado's a tier 3 team. If you're in tier number 3, that means if you play a tier 4 team, obviously if you play another tier 3 team, it's going to be in the white, 40 to 60% range. If you play a tier 4 team, a tier below you, that game's in the 61 to 70% range if it's at home. But if it's on the road, that does drop it into the white, into the 40 to 60% range. So that's how that works. And let's jump right in. So we'll start with the easier games. I think you've got Gardner-Webb, Temple. I'd say Georgia Tech should be able to cruise in both of these games. I'd say Gardner-Webb's probably closer to 99%. Temple maybe closer to 90%, but still, Georgia Tech should be able to take care of business in that game as well. And then we go to games in the blue, Wake Forest and NC State. Now again, this is based off of our tier rankings. There is no human element here. We're not doing any predictions. But, if I'm looking at this from the human side, and I know what kind of coach NC State has, you would expect them to bounce back and be a little bit better this year. So maybe that game if I was predicting it, I would maybe put it in the purple, not the blue. But based off of our tier rankings, and remember, you can only go up or down one tier from where you finished last year. And so because of that, this is a game where Georgia Tech, based off of our tier rankings, should probably win. And again, both of these games in the blue, despite being on the road. In fact, if these games were at home, they would be in the green. They would be counted as wins in the projection. So Wake Forest, NC State, and then we've got a bunch of games, 5 games here where Georgia Tech should be favored and clear favorites, but not by a lot. And these are the games where you could potentially lose. So Virginia Tech's a tier below. Georgia Tech, or Duke, I should say, is a couple of tiers below Georgia Tech. Syracuse, 1 tier below. Boston College, a couple of tiers below, but it's on the road. And then Pittsburgh, 1 tier below. And yeah, I would say Georgia Tech's probably going to be favored by about a touchdown in all these games. They have a real shot, a really good shot to win all of them. And if they do, that only leaves 3 50-50 games or lower, which means, even if you lose those 3 games, 9-3, yeah. So if they win the games they're favored in, Georgia Tech absolutely has a chance to go 9-3 or maybe even 10-2, depending on how these other games come out. But yeah, these are going to be big ones. Odds would say they're probably not going to win them all because that's just the way it goes. But if they can win them all, boy, a 9-win season at least for Georgia Tech, that'd be huge. And if they get to 10-2, all of a sudden we're talking about a playoff team. So I do think Georgia Tech has to be mentioned as one of those dark horse playoff contenders. The way this schedule sets up, I don't think this schedule is all that tough. Again, I think it works out pretty well for Georgia Tech. They do have one game where, again, based off of our tier rankings, they'll be an underdog. That's Georgia. Georgia's in tier 1. Georgia Tech's in tier 3. Even though the game's at home, still that one would be in the yellow in that 30 to 39% range. And then you've got Colorado and Clemson. So Colorado's in the same tier as Georgia Tech. Clemson is in 1 tier. They're 1 tier above Georgia Tech. They're in tier 2, but that game's at home for Georgia Tech. That means that's basically a 50-50 game. I'd probably favor Clemson. I think Clemson's going to be really good this year. I think they might even have a chance to be more like a tier 1 team when you look at all they've got coming back. So that'll be tough. And again, the Georgia game will be tough. But Colorado, that's really, like, if Georgia Tech can go on the road and beat Colorado, and then they win the other games where they're favored, Georgia Tech's at 10-2 and potentially in the college football playoff. Now, I don't know if you get in with this kind of schedule, if you're in the ACC, I don't know if you get in with a 10-2 record. Depends on what happens across the rest of the country. If they lose to Clemson and Georgia, what would their big wins be? You'd have Colorado. You'd have, maybe Virginia Tech's pretty good this year. I mean, there's just not going to be a huge opportunity for resume building wins. Again, if they lose to both Clemson and Georgia, with Colorado possibly being their best win. So that's what concerns me if I'm a Georgia Tech fan. You do get to 10-2. You play Clemson and Georgia tough. You come up short and you still don't get in the college football playoff. I could see that scenario playing out. But again, it all starts with Colorado. I think if Georgia Tech's going to make a run and be that dark horse team, they're probably going to need to beat Colorado on the road. And that obviously would be a tough game. But when you average all these numbers out, again, when you've got 5 games in the purple, odds would say you're going to lose 1 or 2 of those games. So it does kind of average out a little bit lower, and you get an 8-4 projection. So that is the projection for Georgia Tech, which would be right there on the trend. Again, you look at the last 3 years, 5 wins, then 6 wins, then 7 wins. So if that continues, they could get to 8 wins. But like I said, I'm looking at this schedule thinking Georgia Tech, if I'm putting the over-under on there, I'm putting it at 8.5. I think that they've got just as good of a chance to go 9-3 as they do 8-4. And like I said before, this could be a dark horse team in 2025.